from him. Right, and so we want to get started. Sir Mitchell, are you there?
Yes, 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 Dr. Talk.
Yes, ma'am. Great that you could join us. Thank you very much for the engagement. And I sincerely hope everyone.
Sean, this is
Yes,
Glenn.
Glenn.
I had an announcement come on that the meeting was being recorded, so I missed something you said earlier. But
Oh,
I
my
think you said
apologies. Yes, sorry about
that's
that.
okay. Dr. Campbell, you said was the former
Former
department chair.
department chair. He was a former department chair. So he co he basically co-hosts and co-found this podcast with me. But just for reminders, because this is the second week you might have been in meetings here with him. So he
Right.
was a former department chair. And Gary Kessler knows him quite well because the invitation to to skit, um, although I organized it, it was Dr. Campbell who was then department head who facilitated the transition when Prof. Kessler came to UTech. You
Got
know,
it.
so just to give you a little bit of history. And we also have here Leighton Mitchell, who teaches with me on the Masters in Information Security. He teaches the incident response module, but he's a lead forensic analyst and management at Bank of Nova Scotia, and he's now in the Toronto area. He's not based in Jamaica at the moment, but he's always with us, both in spirit, thought, deed, and everything. So we're very glad to have him. Leighton, no introduction is needed necessary for Dr. Campbell, who is well known to you. But Dr. Dardick actually provides for the school at present a remote virtual lab solution. Since this pandemic, many students have to boycott the labs, the physical labs, in the school because we don't want COVID in the labs. So we've been between students leveraging their own resources and a remote thin client solution out of Florida in Daytona, which Dr. Dardick hosts. Um, he has been providing, yeoman support and service to the school since last year. So it's a company we have here of persons. Uh, yes. So let me find out from. So this is a good starting point. So ourselves. Um, all right. All right. So Trevor Forrest will join us again this evening. But he's running a little bit behind. It's a weekend, a holiday evening. And as Arnett was saying earlier, this is my Earth Strong evening, or it's my birthday. I just decided it just happened to be on the same day that this podcast is posted. Um, so to hasten the footsteps until persons join, I do have one other colleague here from Amazon, but he was having some difficulty, so he just sent in his comments based on today's podcast. So at the appropriate point, I'll just include them. Um, so for our purposes, this is a recorded session. It allows for the community in UTech to appreciate some very important pointers um, relating to a very important topic. This is our fourth week of running the podcast. And for those in podcast land, just to let you know, I am Sean Thorpe, the head of School of Computing at UTech and the moderator for these sessions. Today's session actually is about intellectual property, copyright, trademarks, and confidential information generally. And we're going to do a sort of a deep dive over the next hour or so on some very important pointers relating to this area, which affects not only the Caribbean, but it also affects other spaces. So before we get started, let me just confirm the guest list. All right, so without any further ado, we want to get going into this very important conversation. We here at the University of Technology, you believe that intellectual property, patent, copyright, trademarks, and non-disclosure agreements in the form of confidential information is an important area for which the university can have significant contribution, and by similar extension, the local industry. But to understand these concerns and philosophies, we want to sort of get started with the basic definitions. And I'm going to ask you, the panel that is here, to sort of weigh in on just giving me, from just your lay perspective, your layman perspective, what you understand the differences of these terms to suggest. So this evening we have Mr. Leighton Mitchell from the Bank of Nova Scotia in Canada. He works in the area of security and forensics. And we have Dr. Glenn Dardick, who is at Emory University out in Daytona, but he also is CEO of Cyber Explorations, a virtualization data center type company. Now, it's good that we have both academia and industry in the same room. And no less to say that in addition to myself, I'm joined by my co-host and co-founder, Dr. Arnett Campbell, senior lecturer in the School of Computing and Information Technology. And we're very happy to have him here as well. So the conversation that we're going to have, oh, good afternoon, Dr. Telwell Reed, how are you? Pleasant good evening. Thank you for joining. All right, so I wanted to weigh in from your perspectives, gentlemen. Probably Leighton, starting with you, to give me, probably from where you sit, the differences, probably from Bank of Nova Scotia's point of view and that of your own, as to the differences as to intellectual property, patent, copyright, trademark, and non-disclosure agreements. And then I'll just go around the table to get some input from all of us.
Yeah, I mean, well, the intellectual property, it's rather a very interesting topic, especially within the context of from a business perspective, right? And the reason for that, looking at the very definition and the root of it, is that intangible creation of human intelligence. But from a business perspective, what we're seeing is that everything that is created by an employee is owned by the organization. And so I think it's a very good discussion to see, where the laws is centered around these different things, right? And it creates, from my perspective as an investigator, right? We have seen a lot of employees making that common mistake. Who owns this right to the intellectual, the human intellect? Who owns the right to your work? And oftentimes we have seen employees leaving the organization and would want to take that work that they have created and find themselves in deep water. So I think it is relevant to have this kind of conversation, because I think sometimes there's a gray scale. There's this gray area where persons, even though understand it, may run themselves afoul of the law.
Good point there. Good point there, Leighton. Who gives the organization or company the right to think that they own it? That's an extremely important point. The students in the university also ask the same question, interestingly. And I wanted to get some students on the session this evening, but they seemingly were shy to join in this conversation, seeing that I had it as a podcast. But it's a very important point. Who gives that right? Um, uh, Dr. Darley, can you give me your kind perspective? I do have a few more guests who will be joining shortly. But in the meantime, could you give me your perspective on what is the differences of IP, patent, copyright, and trademark, and non-disclosure?
Well, actually, I guess there's differences between those, but there's also differences depending on the environment you're in. When Leighton was mentioning intellectual property belonging to the company, in academia, it's a little bit different. You can question an academic professor develop something, who would own that intellectual property? It's like you, Sean, have developed or written books. All right. So who owns the intellectual property or copyright in the case of the book? Would it be you or would it be the university? And the answer is going to be, it depends on what kind of an agreement you have with the university. Where I'm at Embry-Riddle, they want competitive agreements as to whether you've got any kind of conflict of interests. So for instance, with the university, because I have a separate company and I also have the journal and that sort of thing, those are separate enterprises. And so I say, they're separate. No, you don't own this, I own it, that sort of thing. So intellectual property will vary from place to place. I do wear another hat, which is a forensic examiner, and we come across IP theft all the time when employees leave companies and they go to work for other companies and information shows up at other companies. So that's a whole nother discussion right there as to how you identify that. Can you take a document? What's the value of that document? That sort of thing. The difference between copyrights and trademarks, I can only talk to what it is in the U.S. Copyright can be, of course, something that's written like a book. It can also be software, for instance, a program. Programs, if they represent a new method, could I guess be patented. And then you got the trademark. Trademark is really different from patent and copyright, easily to identify the difference. Trademark is typically, and in the US we have trademark and we have service mark. So a service mark may be something that identifies what the company is doing or something. It's the tagline, if you would. Trademark could be anything such as the font used in a name. It could be a color. For instance, Kodak. There's Kodak Yellow. That sort of thing. Now, an NDA differs from the rest in the sense that if you're going to want to protect your intellectual property, patent, copyright, you need to protect your interests. I think at the last discussion we had, I talked about discarding information that was intellectual property, saying it was confidential, but not taking the necessary steps to prevent it from being copied or used by someone else. An NDA stands for non-disclosure agreement. And typically, if you're going to be engaging in, let's say, a cooperative agreement in developing a product, for instance, or looking at a merger between two companies, those companies are going to disclose information that they're not going to want to be used for other reasons, competitive or otherwise. So an NDA would normally proceed where information specific to a patent or copyright is transmitted. The difference also with intellectual property and patent and copyrights is intellectual property is going to be protected and not going to be shared with others. Patents and copyrights are going to be submitted to the patent office or trademark, or well, trademarks also a trademark office, but they're a matter of public record. So, people will see what they are, and therefore they can make sure that they don't copy them by accident or on purpose. Whereas intellectual property should be protected. It's not protected by way of patent or copyright, but it's protected by how the company secures that information. Now, how that differs between the US, Canada, Jamaica, I'm not an expert in that area, and I would leave it to the others to chime in.
Excellent point. So as you correctly put into perspective, that was Dr. Glenn Dardick making his views just known on the differences between the terms, IP, patent, copyright, trademark, and NDAs. So we heard from Leighton Mitchell from Bank of Nova Scotia in Canada. We have now heard from Dr. Glenn Dardick at Emory, and also CEO of Cyber Explorations. I want to welcome others to the session as more join us. I have here on session Mr. Arthur Fitt, who serves on the advisory board for the School of Computing, Computing and Network Security degree, but Arthur Fitt wears many other hats, you see. He's also president of the Jamaica Computer Society New York chapter. He runs his own business. I think one of them here is Reed Jewelers. He's a CIO for the bank. It's exhaustive, and he has spent a significant amount of time in Jamaican telecoms, including our own eGov Jamaica. So I'm really happy to have him on the call and at short notice to weigh in on this conversation. I'm also happy to have back this week, Mr. Trevor Forrest, CEO of 876 Solutions, guru extraordinaire in the space of tech, served on the School of Computing Advisory Board and as the graduate chair in the last tenure, and he also special advisor to government. So what obtains is that we have a very robust team of persons on the call. Dr. Campbell, I'm going to now ask you to weigh in, and then I'm going to revert to Mr. Fitt, and then Mr. Forrest to just give some quick views. I want to welcome here Latricia Fletcher. Probably could declare yourself for me, please. Latricia. She's not hearing me. All right.
Sorry, Professor Thorpe, Jamaica Customs Agency.
Thank you for Latricia for joining. Well, welcome. All right, so you feel free to weigh in at different points in the conversation, and it's great that Customs was able to join this evening. So thank you for doing that. So Dr. Campbell, you have a view? Yes.
I will yield to Trevor and Arthur at this stage.
You yield to them. All right. Thank you for that. All right. Sir Fitt, we're just making a distinction between what in your expert role as a CIO, as a business owner, in the multiplicity of hats that you wear. When people talk about intellectual property, patent, copyrights, trademarks, and NDAs, what really comes to your mind? Just feel free to speak your mind.
I think Arthur dropped, so ask Trevor to.
Drop?
Yeah.
Drop. Okay. Trevor, are you able to weigh in until I get back to Arthur Fitt?
Yeah, man, sure. Are you guys hearing me?
Yes, hearing you quite well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and I'll preface my comments by saying I'm no expert in the field of patents and copyrights, etc. So let me start there. But as it relates to what we're discussing, NDAs, intellectual property, copyright, so on, I think it's important, for anyone in industry, especially industry where you're creating and innovating things, especially now as we're in the fiercely technologically advanced age, that we have a really good understanding of what each one of these things are, because to me, all of them combined serve as a protection mechanism and framework for whatever it is you're doing, where you're working, what you're working on, what you're creating, and so on. I will say I find that a lot of innovators, inventors, creatives locally are only now getting some sort of appreciation for intellectual property and copywriting. I think Jaipur is doing some good work there, but there's still a way to go. But also, I think, and I've seen this in my time at the Ministry of Technology, Science and Technology. I can't tell you how many times I had an open door policy there, and I can't tell you how many times people came to meet with either myself or the minister to speak about ideas that they had. And what was shocking to me is, these guys had some really innovative ideas and creations, but they never, at no time, did any of them know what a non-disclosure agreement was. And, you kind of had to explain to some of these inventors and creatives and innovators that, look, never you walk into a room with a bunch of people you don't know and share your ideas without having some sort of non-disclosure agreement signed or something like that, because they just didn't understand that and understand the need to protect their creation. So I think all of these things, in combination, serve to protect your creations, your ideas, your innovations, and it is important to at least educate, make people aware that you need to have a lot of these things in place, or be aware of how to use them when it is that you're creating stuff or even sharing ideas with people or companies or so on. Because if you don't, then you'll find that you'll see your creation making millions of dollars for somebody else and not you, and there's nothing you can do about it. You find that many entities or people or investors come, tap ideas, say, listen, I'll give you some money for it, and it's perhaps more money than people have ever seen. Not really a lot, and then you take the idea and they're gone, and then you see your idea making orders of magnitude more than what you were paid for it. So understanding that, and again, it comes back to the business of innovation and so on, is very important.
Excellent point, Mr. Forrest. Excellent point. And I want to weigh in at this point, to make some important inclusions and other part of this distinction. A copyright can last for up to 70 years. A patent is usually up to 20 years. In Jamaica, the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office, which you just heard Mr. Forrest alluded to, JIPO, roll out these provisions yearly. Jamaica, interestingly, is still one of the countries in the world with the lowest cost. I hope everyone is hearing me. With the lowest cost of registering these various forms of protection, right? To your to your intellectual property, and it sometimes behooves me to think that we may be taking things for granted, but it's cheap to the point that you could take 20 Jamaican dollars, 20 Jamaican dollars to go and register, you know, your IP for a new product or a new service. A patent, it being a product patent or a utility patent, I don't think Jamaicans see the value of these provisions. I have been to the local bank asking, if I wanted to start a new business, I'm not trying to use a house as collateral or a car as collateral. I want to use a piece of IP as collateral. The bank says to me, Mr. Thorpe, I do not think that is on our list of items that allows for us to take intellectual capital as any reservation for doing business in any way, shape, or form. And I said to myself, we could be losing out here, which sort of brings me to the second question, given what you have all just explained quite well as it relates to the first. What is the economic path of value? And this path of value term, I must tell you, it's a coinage from my good friend here, Raj Patel, who should be on the call from the JC Silicon Valley. But is there an economic path of value for Caribbean universities, businesses, and government to be engaged in IP, copyright, patents, and trademarks? I would love to hear a context if you think in this time, this is an important thing for institutions. And potentially, I want to start with Glenn in particular. I said Caribbean universities, but I could tweak this to suggest, is this a situation in the US right now where you are as it relates to how universities view these resources? Is there an economic path to value? And possibly I just ask Raj in his wisdom to also share in as a businessman as well. But Glenn, the floor is yours.
Well, I can't really respond as far as Caribbean
No,
universities.
I'm aware. I'm aware.
But,
Yes.
as far as U.S. universities,
Yes.
Obviously many of them, especially the tier 1 or research 1 type universities,
Yes.
do use patents. Mostly in the science fields, aerospace, that sort of thing. In the case of Embry-Riddle, what the economic path in the U.S. is typically what you might see with a university is an incubation center, for instance, where students would put together a business plan and try to take IP developed at a university and commercialize it. That is done frequently. Universities will develop patents, and again, those will be owned by the university because the science being used, the labs being used to develop those belong to the university, not the professor doing it. And the professor is being paid time off from teaching responsibilities to do the research necessary to develop those patents. So definitely there's an economic path to it. Grants, I can't answer, for elsewhere, but there are many grants in the US available to universities. SBIR grants. There's a couple type funding opportunities, both for small technology companies as well as universities that may partner with technology companies and so forth. So the NSF grants, National Science Foundation, many of those, if not all of those, would be limited perhaps to American or U.S. universities, but I haven't gone into much detail to that to be able to
Fair
give
enough.
you more of an answer.
Fair enough. So in the US universities, you are correct. There's the availability of the National Science Foundation grants, and there are usually technology transfer offices that deal with all of these matters in a seamless way. As I was saying, in Jamaica here, it is about 20 to 50 Jamaican dollars to register an IP or a patent. Interestingly, on the same economic path to value question, if I register a patent in Jamaica, right, it's a country patent. If I'm going to register the patent, it is best I register it as a international cross-border patent, which could actually start running me anywhere in the order of 50,000 US or more for it to be truly representational. Because if I only register the patent in Jamaica and somebody else in the US comes up with a new product or utility and they register a patent equivalently, I can't actually have that access in the US. So I need to ensure that my patent is cross-border. Copyright, however, gives me that cross-border, especially with peer-reviewed published papers and so on. So I'm back to that economic path to value question. And I'm seeing where Mr. Raj Patel, I think he is able to join us back on the phone. And I was saying, Raj, on the heels of Dr. Dardick's sharing just now, that I told the team here, I took this path to value as a coinage from you in all our previous discussions. So it's appropriate to ask you, as a businessman, as the president of the JCS Computer Society Silicon Valley chapter, and your years of service, even here in Jamaica, with many of the local entities, and even now with your businesses, is there a path to value for introducing IP and patent and copyright and trademarks for the businesses here and elsewhere, including where you have been?
Can you hear me, Sean?
I'm hearing you quite well, sir. Pleasant
Okay.
good evening. Pleasant good evening to you, yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be part of this panel. I feel humbled. That said, quick answer to your question followed by some of my own thoughts. The answer is, it depends on your target market. What do I mean by that? If you're developing a product or a service that is bankable, worthy of securing it via a patent or IP rights or copyright, is there a market for it? Where is that market? United States, India, Europe? The reason I bring this up is because there is no such thing as an international one-stop, global patent, right? The patent starts and stops within the geographical border or boundary of the country you're registering that in. United States, obviously we have here the United States Patent Office, right? That's typically obviously governed by the Paris Convention on Global or International Patents, right? So if you were to market your product, say in the United States and India, right, then you have to register your patent in India as well. And then if you want reciprocity between the US and Indian markets, you have to make sure that the two countries are signatories to that international cross-border patent. And typically it's governed again, depending on the region, it could be the Paris Convention, or there's also another sort of a governing office or a clearing house in Europe and Africa. But really, it comes down to the market that you want to sell your wares to or into, right? Because clearly, I'd like to see where Jamaican companies develop something, that can be marketed here in the United States or in India or in Europe. Now, obviously, it's very competitive. But again, the answer to your question is, Sean, yes. But obviously, you have to know what your target market is, because, how far does your patent, in Jamaica take you? Is there reciprocity within CARICOM, the 14 English-speaking island nations? Fine. But if you want to, go beyond that, then, you have to look at, again, developing a product or a solution or service, for the market that you want to register that in.
Excellent. Excellent points. Excellent point. As a matter of fact, thank you very much for that input. And you know, in meeting with the head of the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office, it has only been, I think, within the last 5 to 7 years that Jamaica is now able to achieve this reciprocal output for any patents or intellectual property, because we were not signed to that international treaty that you just referred to, based on the World Convention. So the World Intellectual Property Office, WIPO, for which we are a part of, you know, we learned that we only just got that international treaty. So we can now register for cross-border patents to give us that cross-border value for if we are starting up any new businesses to benefit from such an outcome. Now, Mr. Arthur Fidd, who was on the call earlier, but unfortunately lost connection, is back. And out of courtesy, I'm just going to allow him, if he's ready now, just to share his open views on this whole business of patents, copyright, and a path to value for companies. As a man with many companies and also running several other operations in others, is there a path to value for these things? And can we in the Caribbean here benefit from these activities? Welcome to Caribbean Thought Leadership, our podcast series on Sunday, sir.
Hi, colleagues. How are you guys doing? Apologies, we have some issues here with our AT&T connections in North Carolina.
Yes.
So Sean, I am definitely not an expert in IP, patent, or copyrights. I've spent a lot of time doing NDAs for certain, but I think the thing that I was kind of focusing on, and I'm not sure if y'all have gotten to that as yet, is the discussion of technology transfer.
Yes.
And so I'm not sure if I'm sort of jumping.
Oh, yes, we were still talking about the path to value and companies, but we're actually jumping into that in a moment as it relates to that technology transfer, because it sets up well that very discussion. We in the universities for sure believe that this is a new way out. In terms of as a matter of fact, I can say to you, the University of Technology has asked the academic faculty to increase by 600% its outcomes relating to patents over the next 5 years, right? And we should be doing more copyright production as it relates to peer-reviewed published work. Probably some of that peer-reviewed published work could be patents that comes out of it, IP, and to also build out new startup companies. So there's this rationale in the local universities, not just only in UTech, but also at University of the West Indies, in terms of being driven by research, and that research is tied to the whole space of patents and copyright and IP, and hence the reasoning behind the question. But private sector could have a different view. So as you said, you spend more of the time on non-disclosures. But could you weigh in quickly then, Arthur, what is the value of the non-disclosures when you engage, albeit a university or otherwise, company to company, or you know, what's the significance of that to you and the business?
I run a innovation center, and I've run a number of them in each of the organizations that I've led. And in an effort to allow the fintechs that especially early stage fintechs that I do work with, you know, primarily it's a legal sense of protection at first, that in order for us to engage, we're going to have a mutual non-disclosure agreement, which essentially, you know, binds me, the bank or the retailer, to certain protocols and language that will bring comfort to the fintech that I'm about to study, research, do a proof of concept with, or a prototype, and vice versa. That you know, I am comfortable that when they see my client's data, that it'll be treated with all of the right protocols and so forth. So it forms the first step towards beginning to leverage the IP, in my case, of these fintechs, but anybody for that matter, to create something that's commercial, something that is going to add value to humanity as we see it. So it's critical. It's an immediate starting point for me in any sort of proof of concept prototype work that we do.
Valuable input there, and it's a learning point for even us in the universities as to how some companies will perceive how we proceed with research that needs to go into the public space. All right, so thank you very much for that. And I was just going around the room here, the Zoom room. Leighton, you have a view on this path to value situation suggested here, followed by Dr. Campbell.
Absolutely. I think it's relatively an interesting notion. There are some, I know we haven't gone into the barriers as yet, but definitely I think the third question will tie into that. There are some opportunities, but as well, there are some barriers from my perspective as a banker, a career banker. We have seen many of great ideas, that comes before the organization, right? For whatever means. And early on in your comments, you mentioned IP funding, right?
Yes.
The idea alone will not necessarily sit within a financial institution, and I think one of your panelists mentioned about the innovative center or an incubator at the university. So I do know that the University of Technology operates an innovation center. One of the challenges that we have seen within the Caribbean, from a small, medium-sized enterprise, is the lack of proper development of their business plan, right? So they have good ideas, there will be ideas, but unless there is a well documented plan of action to execute and to derive that opportunity, it will not realize. So I think there are some opportunity for both incubators at university level, researchers, business personnel, and the government alike to make the best of the situation there is. But for sure, there are opportunities that can be realized within this field.
So before I pass this on to Dr. Campbell, both yourself and Arthur Field are in banking. You're out of Jamaica. You're both Jamaicans, but out of Jamaica. You're one in Canada. He's between New York and North Carolina. If I went to the US and I said I had a valuable product here, I'm a university student, I'm onto something great, I want to build out a new company, I come with a great idea, I come with a good business proposal. In Canada, would this be funded based on the intellectual capital?
From where I sit, I don't necessarily know the answer to that. Okay. But keep in mind that banks, lend money and some sense of surety. They're taking your money, my money, lending it to someone else, and with there's some element of trust that they should be able to get back that money so they can pay back you and I. So based on their business model,
it may not happen. So
it may not happen, right? Okay. But the path in terms of grants, government grants, I think will definitely kick. And keep in mind that we know for a startup company, it will struggle for the first 2 years average before it starts to turn and make profit, right? And if you look at most of the big technology companies, there's that support system in Silicon Valley, right? Based on my understanding. So unless we have that kind of partnership that will allow startups that kind of support to get them off the ground, that will give the banks more confidence to want to support that kind of idea. Outside of that, I would see it as a risky business for
Okay.
organization like banks to, just lending funding and just the premise of a good idea.
Okay, and is that the same view as well, Art, that the banks would not just get up and lend students or universities, faculty with great ideas that they have as use cases or proof of concept to monetize it till it gets to product or market? I'm not sure if Art is hearing me. He might be muted.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh yes, I'm hearing you now.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was saying that my experience is a little bit different. For example, Citibank has its FinTech Innovation Center in Tel Aviv, which last time I checked is not here in the US. And a ton load of startups and early startups are being funded by them directly. In my case, it's necessary for me to take, 20 million out of my budget and give it to a young startup in Jamaica, as much as I have an opportunity to introduce that Jamaican startup to the capital markets. And I've actually done 2 so far. I really can't give their name right now,
Sure.
but you do know one of them, Sean. And so they're using, through my connection with them, we're sort of a broker to help them with that business case that Leighton talked about.
Okay.
And then help them write it in such a way that folks in my capital markets here in the US will want to pay attention and listen. And so my approach is to connect them with where the money is, not necessarily my money. Now, the other interesting thing is that the investors in our capital markets, especially those looking at fintechs, are willing to invest in startups in Jamaica. But the one thing they always say, Leighton, is if you can find me a local investor who's on the ground, we will come along and we will fund a portion of that startup. But they want to make sure there is someone in with skin in the game who's local, who understands the culture, the society, the economics, and so forth. So there's real opportunities, and it doesn't always mean that the institution is going to do an angel investor or fund it, as much as we can be the bridge to bring them to the capital markets, but help them create the business case in a way that we know will be accepted.
Excellent point. That's a learning point, actually. Excellent learning point.
And just to add to that comment, and there are a number of new initiatives that I'm seeing coming out of Jamaica, and it appears to be that there is that recognition that these startups need really good business case, business plan. And I've seen a number of companies now taking on that mantra to help the startup, to kind of help them to develop that will allow them to connect to the financiers within the space. So I think persons beginning to recognize the value in it, but I do believe that that there's a lot more that can be done from all sectors.
Excellent. So I defer to Dr. Campbell now to make his comment quickly on this. What's the perspective of you, Dr. Campbell, in this regards? I've heard from the bankers.
Good evening, everyone. From the academic point of view, I would say that how do we prepare our students? How do we prepare our colleagues in academia to get on that path to converting their intellectual property to economic value? I think there is a deficiency from my point of view in terms of the training and the activities at the university level where we are. And it's one thing to ask staff to produce 600% increase in patents, etc. But without helping to create that kind of infrastructure that will enable them to see value being derived from this effort, it is not likely to succeed.
Yes.
Right. So I think that we need to invest in creating that bridge to help persons to convert ideas into business cases, into economic outcomes.
Yes.
Right. And as they do so, the university should support that in terms of maybe creating an office within the graduates School of Graduate Studies at first to help to support schools and faculties to get that done.
Yes.
And that would be a worthwhile start, in my opinion.
Excellent point. So on the merit of that, the university has always spoken about a technology transfer office. And what I've seen in other universities, both in the US, Canada, and Europe, is the inception of a technology transfer office that would infuse this type of culture of which you speak. So this puts the next question on the floor to everyone, and I throw it around the table. But Trevor, I'm sorry, my apologies. Trevor, go ahead. I did not include you on the last point. Trevor, path to value. Yes, yes, please.
Yeah, Sean. So as it relates to economic value,
Yes, thank you for that.
patents.
Yes.
I think there's tremendous economic value in many spheres. We tend to focus on public sector, private sector, academia, and I think there's tremendous value in each one of those that can be derived from patents, simply because when you have companies or even individuals that have patented products, right? What you tend to find happening is that there is, an influx of investment to, those kinds of entities, those kinds of companies, those kind of people, because of the real or perceived value of the patent.
Yes.
Or the patented product, right?
Yes.
So right away, you can see that. Now, the challenge we have in Jamaica is fully appreciating a couple of things. One, the value of intellectual property. One, the value of a patent, of a patented product, or a patent per se. Let's just put it that way. And how to value that, because a lot of times the people who create these things have no idea how to value them, because inventors, creators, innovators oftentimes are not business people, right? So to derive the real value of these creations that can be patented, they have to understand and be able to understand the value and how to value what they have created, right? So we have a real challenge there. And in addition to that, and I think, Professor, it is something that you really have to look at in academia, Dr. Campbell was alluding to it, is that we don't groom our students, our innovators, in ways that get them to understand business value of their intellectual property, their creations, their innovations, and all of that. And as such, they're more focused on creating a business to make some money, without understanding what is required to create a sustainable business. And what happens is, Angel, I was having a conversation about that this very morning. Angel investors when they are approached or when they're searching for companies to invest in, what they oftentimes find is that the business that's coming to ask them for money is a complete accounting mess, nightmare. There is no business plan, and the people who are the principals of that don't even know how to write a business plan, because that's not their thing. They're not business people. And I think what needs to really happen is there needs to be a fundamental shift in our educational system that starts as early as primary school or prep school to infuse the whole idea of creating a business and what is involved in doing that. So picture, if you will, and you know, again, Sean and I have these discussions all the time. Picture a university campus. A university campus has all the ingredients for a business. They have a marketing faculty, they have a business faculty, they have an engineering faculty, they have all the different faculties. But you know what happens? They're all in silos. They never work together. But they have every component that a business requires. And at no time does the business faculty go to the engineering faculty or vice versa to say, listen, you have a product, let's develop a business plan, or let's develop a marketing plan, and so on. We don't do that. Everybody just does stuff in their own little silo. And I think we need to kind of break and, you know, say, look, people in business need to work with people in marketing and engineering and computer science and all of that, because part of your education must be, before you leave university, to have created a working business, right? Register a business, you know, build a board, create a product, market the product, create a business plan, all of these things, so that everybody learns what is involved in actually doing that stuff in the real world. Universities don't do that down here. Everybody's in their silo. And I think we need to kind of rethink how we engage our students so that they learn what they have to do in the real world. So when they actually have to go and do it or want to go and do it, they have some sort of idea and some sort of training as to what is required for that great idea. I think that is what we need to do a little bit more of. And that is where the economic value will start
comes in.
Yes.
So you have said it before, Mr. Forrest, the university is a business within business, but if it is siloed, then the parts will never make the whole. And it will then require leadership agility to realize that if we can all come together and get that one product out or set of products out, then the business case that we need to make to auto fit or to Late Mitchell will be clear, because we would have local investors supporting us. And if overseas investment needs to match it, then at least the overseas partner will say, well, okay, they see with clarity where the opportunities would lie. I think it's some homework. I will take it, and you know, I'm glad that this is on a podcast which is sharing to the Open University community. So it's a Caribbean Thought Leadership Forum 101. And this is our 4th week of these sessions. So I'm really happy to get these very riveting comments, very clear and coherent comments on a very important topic. So I thank you, Mr. Forrest, for that last point and all the points of all the other panelists so far in this conversation. So, all right, against the background of that, the universities, colleges, both in Jamaica and across the region, need to have a vehicle like a technology transfer office, potentially, to do this. But let me get from you all a sense of what are the barriers to entry for establishing IP and the associated other services engaged in technology transfer. You may have started saying it already, Trevor. I would think in terms of the silos where institutions are engaged. But let's go back around the table and probably ask, starting off with Raj, to probably weigh in on is there a perceived or real barrier to entry for wanting to engage the use of IP and any other associated services, full stop, as a part of technology transfer, but for a business, a school, whatever it may be?
Yeah, can you repeat that, Sean? Because I'm trying to understand, what perspective you'd like me to.
Oh, okay. So in other words, is there let us say the use case of in India, for example, when businesses are setting up in India and the universities and the colleges in India, are they having the similar challenge that is now being said in Jamaica, for example, in getting IP and the associated other services for their inventions or innovations? Is there any such observed challenges in that jurisdiction, for example?
Yeah, thank you. No, again, it goes back to the size of the market, right? I mean, India,
Yes.
Obviously, like China, Brazil, the BRICS coalition, if you have
Yes.
heard of that, right?
Yes, I have.
Aside from obviously the Western economies, it can stand on its own. But that said, yes, a lot of universities in India actually have entered into technology transfer partnerships, yeah, with their counterparts in the U.S. Now, I'll say this, though. The industry that I'm in, right, geospatial-based infrastructure management and civil engineering services, right, the company that I'm part of, we work with the universities a lot, because a lot of what we do that we actually offer as part of our solutions, really it's incubated in university settings, because the reason is, Sean, I'll tell you, again, that I'm in, it's highly specialized. We have to develop solutions, that have to support a whole lot of standards. And so it's easier for us to partner with universities, right? To go to them and say, hey, look, we've got the solution. We would like to partner with you. We'd like to incubate, in your environment. Universities have the fastest path. And then hear me out. How I always say path to value? Universities, in my opinion, have the fastest path to, a patent or IP or technology, a transfer. Just again, because of, the research focus and obviously, their relationships, with the respective nations. Patent or IP in the registration offices. So the point is, yes, India, even if you took the size of the market out, there is opportunity, for engage with universities, to develop or co-develop solutions, because what happens as a result of that, like Novartis, as you know, Novartis, that I work for, I'm a part of
Yes.
Here, we initiated a grant program with UTech, Sean, as you know, and I signed an NDA with you,
That's right.
an MOU. A lot of the features that are in our solutions platform actually have been commercialized, that were incubated, in different universities. So yeah, there is opportunity. Yeah, you just have to know what your market is.
So for clarification then, Raj, and before I move around the table, in India, you're saying, for example, is it the institutions, the academic institutions? Is it the government agencies that set up the technology transfer offices that will enable these type of services? Is that what happens in India?
It's both, but it's all funneled through the Indian Chamber of Commerce. It's called NASSCOM. I've heard of that, right? So they're obviously the clearinghouse, right? The front for all these universities, and also public-private partnerships, to really engage with different universities, as well as technology companies, not just in the U.S. but also in Europe. Like, for example, I just got back from India, as you know, 3 weeks ago. I was there last month for 5 weeks, and again, same deal, right? I actually signed some agreements with some partners, but I met with one. A friend of the University of the Indian Institute of Science, and they have signed, a couple of, technology transfer agreements, right? With one university here in the U.S. and the other one's actually, in Netherlands. So yeah, they do this all the time, but of course, they've got the benefit of the size of their market. And so yeah. And speaking of which, Sean, again, Arthur noted, brought up a good point about again trying to make an impact, for the good of humanity. And speaking of it, yesterday the Minister of External Affairs, right, the equivalent of the Secretary of State in India, he arrived in the U.S. Guess for what? To meet with the U.S. government, Secretary of State, who's basically brokering a meeting with the CEOs of big pharma companies, for transfer of technology as it relates to setting up vaccine manufacturing facilities, for the flu vaccine. So there you have it.
Very
There's collaborations going on all the time.
Very
You just
interesting.
have a good, a product and a good case.
Okay, so based on what Raj has just said, then colleagues, the culture in India is now world transferable in that, they already see a base for having technology transfers through the universities for supporting IP and associated services. As a matter of fact, they seem to overcome the argument of the barrier. But let me go across the room and get the different perspectives from the different persons around this table. I'll go to Glenn, then I'll go to Leighton, then to Arth, and then to Trevor and Arnett in that order. Glenn, is there a perspective you have in terms of barriers, or is it the same as Raj and Udito? What says you on this point of technology transfer?
Well, I think I would go back to what Trevor said earlier.
Okay.
And that, one of the big barriers is, having students or even faculty really understanding how to put a business plan together.
Okay.
I know the universities, some, I shouldn't say all, but some universities in the US have competitions for students
Yes.
to submit business plans. Not necessarily, and I mean, some of those may be, accepted and actually financed. But it goes earlier too. In the US, we have in secondary school, or I know at least in the 8th grade, I don't remember the range of grades, but junior achievement, as an example, teaches students about, how businesses operate. And they get to be able to put a business plan type thing together. And the only other item I would say is, starting with personal finance. It's amazing how many students can't even, balance a checkbook.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
some universities are doing this. It's happening in the high schools and junior or middle schools, I guess, with, things like junior achievement, but it's still not, everywhere. And
Okay, excellent point. So there's a need for education, which is a form of literacy through business to set these things up. And as you correctly said, the discipline of starting with self-funding, and nobody's going to invest in you unless you literally can invest in yourself. All right, I take that as a useful point. So I'm moving the floor. Leighton, you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, and
yes.
I think we, the previous questions would have, brought out some of the
Yes,
barriers.
that's true.
Again, one of the things that I go back to one of the point that Trevor made earlier about the not understanding or appreciating the value and not able to measure the value. I think that would also be something that can act as a barrier to realize this initiative. But I want to look at two different factors, things that I believe that could be a contributing factor.
Yes.
Arthur talk about India and what is happening in India, and I would want to look at the cultural differences, right?
Oh, I think that was Raj. That was Raj. But yes, it's
Raj,
in India.
yes.
Yes.
The cultural differences between the countries, right?
Yes.
Jamaica, and that's one. And two, I somewhere along there, I think the whole issue of trust could play a role in terms of
It's
acting
true.
as a barrier.
That's true.
And in terms of culture, you know, specific to that, one of the things we talk about, the silos, right? There might be a culture where you know, a scientist, although that person understanding that they're a creative genius, but they are not necessarily a good businessman. The whole issue of trust and culture may prevent that person to want to partner with and team up with other persons with the relevant skills to move the idea from being an idea and developing it. So I think those are two factors that probably will need more time to kind of dive into to see whether or not
Excellent.
it is
Yes,
actually a barrier.
the one on trust, I tell you that one is a big one. That's definitely a big one. Thank you very much for that point, Mr. Mitchell. And as I move across the room, you know, taking off from Mr. Mitchell's point here as well as Dr. Dardick's point earlier, can the technology transfer office, and I'm not sure, how should it look or what should it really embody to enable that trust that could help to remove some of these barriers? Probably one of the other panelists could sort of give a shed of light in their own experience of how they have interacted with technology offices in general. Where the technology office itself helps as opposed to being a hindrance to supporting that transfer on projects. But was very good point from Mr. Mitchell just now on those two other widening gaps that we must pay attention to. So I'll detour here to Art and then Trevor in that order.
Yeah. So, you know, so Leighton and Trevor and everyone, you know, we're touching on all the dimensions of this thing, right? And we're missing an infrastructure that's designed to drive innovation and technology transfer, quite frankly, right?
Yes.
And you know, we're all, and I say we here within the Jamaican context.
Yes.
If you look at Startup Jamaica, which you know kicked off, I don't know, gosh, 10 years ago, and all kinds of great ideas. I have shepherded a number of them, right? And some have gone on to far-flung places as Africa. And others have been introduced to the capital markets here. But here are some things that they've shared with me, Sean. One,
Yeah.
to the point about trust. Interestingly, it's not just trust between colleagues as much as it's trust having to do with the sharks who want to devalue their companies and take it, right? And in the Jamaican context, far too many of these, when they eventually get on my radar, and I said, well, why are you talking to me? They're like, you know, listen, we were speaking to such and such and such and such. They don't know how to value what we have. So not only, you know, do the innovators not understand how to value their product, their IP, the people who are going to invest in them don't know how to value it because this is new stuff. You know, it's one thing to value a house and a car, right? It's another to value a technology that's using augmented reality to bring a whole new way to sell rings. Now you go to the average angel investor in Jamaica and where are they going to start? So there's that issue. So the investors need to be educated. And one of the things that I know we're doing at the Mona School of Management and Business is we're redesigning the entire pedagogy so that our graduate students, especially the courses I teach, must do business cases as part of their practicum and as part of their final presentation, because we recognize the gap. But there's some bigger issues, right? We don't have enough IP lawyers in Jamaica who have the experience in software and IP law.
Yes,
That's just a fact.
Speak up the things, brother. Speak up the things. Yes.
So we have a multi-dimensional issue here, folks. And this is not easy, but we need to state all the issues, right? So we have a shortage of IP lawyers, software lawyers, and that's just a fact. Two, we have the investors in quotes who really aren't looking out for the best interest of these young innovators. They're sharks. And they also don't understand how to value product. And then we have the young investors who, as we've all opined, have not been properly groomed or educated on how to make that case, how to write that case. How do you calculate a return on investment? And so the combination of these, represents the ball and chain, yeah, AKA the barriers. But on top of that, we also need government to play a role. Sean, and remember when Nehru became prime minister in India, and we always reference India,
Yes.
just remember he did say that he's going to create his own scientists, his own physicists, his own engineers, and he started the Indian Institute of Technology, which today is where half of Silicon Valley is hiring all of its people, and all the
That's true.
IPs are coming out of there. So it shows you that a visionary government working in concert with a visionary academia is the secret sauce. That's why I
Yeah.
call it an infrastructure. And I think that the time is coming, Sean, where you and McNaughton and all of our colleagues and the Trevors of the world, we're all just going to have to push this thing so that we can have a proper partnership between government and us to do what is right for these young minds, so that it goes beyond just saying, look, we have 15 startups and we did 12 IPOs.
Yes.
That's not going to move the needle.
Yes, indeed, indeed. It's a very rich conversation here on Caribbean Thought Leadership on a Sunday evening. Leave your comments on the end of this podcast below. I take what you just said out as an extremely valuable point. I move from, yes, but I'm gonna now, yes, Dr. Campbell, please jump in right away.
Yeah, I just wanted to add here to what Arthur just said.
Yes.
The vision, that vision of Nehru in India. We had the same vision in Jamaica. Jamaica formed the Jamaica Institute of Technology at the same time, the predecessor to CAST, right? And what happened to ours? So I see here, we have a way of starting. Is it cultural that is affecting us? We have a way of starting something, and then just about the point where we are to dig in and create structures and move to sustainable implementation. We have always seemed to falter and not succeed. As thought leaders, what can we offer out of our discussion that would encourage our new innovators and inventors to move to the next level, to learn that India didn't just happen overnight. It has been a planned path to development. And just like China didn't happen overnight, if we watch them to the point where, like in the 60s and early 70s, when products were coming out of many of these countries, they were deemed inferior. And as they learn and improve and other things change around it until they are where they are today, we have to recognize that we have to go through our learning curve, but we have to do it more rapidly. Right? So the world is open to us. So I have a question that I would like you to add. In terms of where we look towards appropriate technologies for transfer, should we be looking at creating new inventions, or should we be looking at adoption, innovation, and play a second role until we get to that point where we are mature enough to move forward?
That's interesting, Dr. Campbell, and I think that's a beautiful concept there, and I think it's got to be both, right? Because there are a lot of new inventions that have been developed already, and what they don't have, Doc, is the shepherd, an environment of shepherds, right? Who can now guide them, and dare I say, bring them to the international capital markets, right? So there's that avenue, and yes, there's definitely room to not reinvent the wheel, right? But to make the wheel more efficient, make it stronger, and make it spin faster, just to use a metaphor. So I think the opportunities are there. I think certainly being as close as I am to a bunch of these kids, by the way, many of them went to UTech, many of them went to NCU with whom I was affiliated. They're all there with all these wicked ideas, but they don't know, and they don't have the support to bring it to that next level. So that center in the university, that office, whatever you choose to call it, Sean, is critical, but government needs one of those as well. And I think if that message gets out that, look, government is going to work in a very serious way with universities to promote development of IP, and then also to build a bridge to introduce them to global capital markets, not just capital markets in Jamaica. I think that's going to be a first big positive step towards the change.
I agree. I fully agree with you. As a matter of fact, on this program, I want to take the initiative to see if we are suggesting, and I would definitely be in for it, to actually set up our own technology transfer office. I mean, as a part of the university. You said government, but it could also be an arm of the JCS as well, that you could have a technology transfer office. You could have segments of it sitting between organizations, seeing if government does not move with the type of alacrity to get things done. I particularly like the view that you shared, that the narrative of how IIT was created was a set of guys got up and said, let's go do this. So we at UTech have invited University of Notre Dame, for example, as a case study. I recall that being done in 2019 to look at their technology transfer office. I've been to University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I've seen them with a technology transfer office. The staffing complement that you mentioned just now and the gaps, however, I didn't realize it was so huge until you said it. The IP lawyers, the software lawyers, and it's all true. Is it possible? This is a move I want to make tomorrow morning, this evening, tomorrow morning. We can make a move right now to say, create a technology transfer office. If this is going to create any kind of outcome, we who are here could generate a technology transfer office. I will lead that. And we resource it with the people who you know who could be brought in from anywhere in the diaspora as global expertise, because you see the need for it. You know an IP lawyer, Trevor knows a software lawyer. I know a few persons as well who are good at proofreading all these documents, right? Put a company secretary in place, but the intent here is, can we move to that as an activity now? What would it take as a minimum effort or minimum viable product to do so?
So Sean,
yes.
I just want to come in at this point.
Sure.
I mean, Fide was hitting all salt and nails on them head earlier.
You're right.
Comments. And I mean, listen,
yeah.
This is, you know, as we see, this is a complex situation. I think what Leighton pointed out earlier with culture and trust, yes. major part of why things have not progressed the way they need to. But I would submit that there is also another component, and I'm going to line out something, an approach that I've, you know, put to the highest level as well. So culture is a big problem. And until we erode aspects of the culture that Leighton was talking about, some of this stuff just won't materialize. So even what you're talking about, Sean, where where we talking on this in this group, we can put something together. You can do it, and you'll check a box that says we did this, we built it, but then after a while nobody was coming. And what it really demands, which is what I think Arthur was alluding to with what happened in India, was there needs to be an overall policy direction, national imperative that says we are going in this direction. All right. Now, how I kind of fashioned it when I was in the appropriate position was, look, I was selfish towards technology because that was my space. I said, look, if we don't have a national policy that says this is what we're going to be good at, these are the areas that we're going to invest in. Yes, we know there are about 1,000 different things, but as far as Jamaica is concerned, these are the areas we are going to be good at. So just like when people say Jamaica, they know athletics and reggae music. Well, when they say Jamaica in tech, Jamaica must be synonymous with certain technologies, and we must decide what these technologies will be, create a national policy and imperative to galvanize all efforts and funding around these things, right? And that is what government should do. Government don't need to do nothing else but that kind of stuff, because I find that we also depend on government to do too much when we have the ability and capability to do things. Don't wait on government to do certain things. Understand what it is government ought to do. Government sets that national policy and imperative and say, look, this is where we want to go. This is the technologies, or these are the technologies we're going to be good at. If you choose 3 or we choose 5, whatever. And all of our efforts are going in that direction. And for the next 15, 20 years, that's where we're going. Now, I mentioned 15, 20 years. Our culture doesn't lend itself to long-term activities. And we need to change that. How do you change that? You don't start in university. You start in primary school. So the imperative that you create today has to start in growing its roots in primary school, all right? Because that is how you sustain it over that period of time. That's how India did it. India didn't say, oh, we're going to do it in 5 years. Worse, China, because the Chinese, these guys are planning for decades and centuries, right? We plan for the next election cycle, right? That cannot work, right? So government needs to be coerced into a national policy for technology or science, and one is there actually, and we need to take that direction. And once we do that, then all the efforts in curriculum from primary, secondary, tertiary are adjusted to facilitate that long-term vision. All of the funding that we get from multilaterals or foreign direct investment is channeled to those spaces. Yeah, man might come and say, well, I want to give money for this. So that's great, but you know what? We want money for this. These are our imperatives, and it's very predictable. So investors know what it is, our priorities in our country. Then once we can do that, then you'll start to see a shift in the thinking, the culture, the investment, the growth, and the economy around those particular things. If we don't decide to do that, then all of these other little efforts where, oh yeah, let's go and create a transfer thing, let's go create an agency to do this, that, all those things will happen. They'll last about 5-7 years, and in that time we'll come back having the same discussion again. If we do not do things in this particular structured way from a national level, national imperative, national policy, we're going to come back 5 years later talking about the same thing, wondering why it never happened. Dr. Campbell says, when Nero started his thing, so did we. Yeah, we just follow, but we never created a plan. We are good at talking about stuff, but we never implement in a sustainable way. Until we get to that point, none of this stuff is going to bear the kind of fruit that it can bear. And we're doing an injustice to the innovators and the creatives out there, the inventors out there. If we do not coerce government to do what they're doing, academia to do that which they need to do, and the private sector to understand and give guidance to what needs to happen for things to make sense and to work for them. We don't do that. So this thing is, no pun intended, academic.
Well, welcome to Caribbean Thought Leadership, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very riveting conversation here about IP patent and copyright and non-disclosure. This argument of technology transfer is in fact a very strong argument. So Trevor, I took that point. I will take that point.
Well said, Trevor. Well said.
This is over 50 years now that we have been trying to
Well
make
said,
that.
Trevor. Well
Yes.
said. The
Yes.
only other, there was
Support
one
there,
other
Trevor.
institution that did the same thing, was out of Ghana, and they are further ahead than UTech is today.
There you go.
Yes. But so where do we, so in other words, all the things that Trevor just said, to make that transition, however, is an elephant move that will need to be made, because to convince existing governments to write and change policy and direction relating to technology transfer requires them to have already even understood this concern, and to be putting those things in motion. What is the organic path to value?
No, sir. Hold on. First of all, it is not a gargantuan move, because a national policy for science and technology has already been created. It has just not been brought to the fore in the way that it needs to, right? I think we need to start there and get sufficient buy-in and backative. Well, first of all, some people need to read that policy.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's been sitting in the ministry since I left there, because when I left there in 2018, it was done. It was to have been tabled in Parliament.
Yes.
And I believe it was tabled, but nothing else happened after that.
Yes.
And we need to start there, because too long we've, again, talked about stuff. We've written all these nice policies and stuff, and then nothing happens after that. So we need to start there. Know what already exists and build that. Because we're not talking about anything new here.
Yes,
right?
But can I play devil's advocate though? I mean, we all use the analogy of sports earlier. When I think about the likes of Usain Bolt and Asaf and so on, for national policy to influence sports, I don't think those guys sat down and wait until the policy to catch up with them, listening their own stories. Those guys went off organically and started doing things that gave them international traction. And then policy catch up.
No,
I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm playing devil's advocate.
Hold on. You know what our national policy was? Champs. That was our national policy.
There you go.
Right? Champs and GC Foster. Right? That was our national policy. Champs created the juggernaut named Jamaican Athletics. Right? GC Foster puts out some of the greatest trainers and athletic minds in the world.
Yes.
Right? That was our policy. Right? Now go and look at where Champs started. Go and check that history.
Yes.
Right?
So the analogy is to say that, but is it possible then, as it relates to the technology transfer, we may already have some of the people who could move this agenda forward that can build the trust, etc., but it just needs the leadership. It needs to start with a proof of concept that we can build this leadership into something that produces some significance of output. And then everybody says, look at UTech, or look, over there, you have a terms of reference to go by, because I don't want us to say, well, boy, I think the opportunity is here for us to do it. I think the takeaway point from this very line here is, hey, go look at the national policy. I think I'm going to ask all of us to get a copy of that policy. I'm going to look at it this week. I'm going to then see what can be done as an organic startup for a technology transfer. We at UTech have said it so many times that we're going to build one out. I want us to start one, and I want to see what needs to be done to get some initiatives going under that technology transfer startup. I reach out to the JCS chapters in the diaspora to ask them for assistance, because there's a wealth of knowledge and talent in the team out there in the diaspora which has not been leveraged. I mean, we just Art here and Raj on the call. This over 25 years of experience or more, and that's just being youthfully exuberant on what we could start doing to get a technology transfer up. I reside myself on that point. I think it's something that can be done. And the 5 to 7 years, but I tell you, that's a long window to not recognize that the change we may be looking for could exceed the 5 to 7 years. But I'm willing to start with the 5 to 7 years.
Oh, absolutely.
To ensure that we have a starter outcome. Because feeling which I take Usain Bolt and I take Asaf of Powell and all of those guys' views of how they attacked, challenges. And I think we can apply that over here into the technology space and the academia space generally. So this is a very riveting conversation we've been having this afternoon with a set of professionals here, local and in the diaspora, on where IP and patent and non-disclosure is going. I tell you, this is really good stuff. So we have moved this around the table, and I think everyone around the table had an equal opportunity chance. I think Leighton probably came off the call just momentarily, but he had also elucidated on this point earlier. So I'm going to move to the next question. Big tech. So hold on now. If we're going to move to technology transfer as an opportunity to support the wealth creation, and there are use cases in the world of how this has been done, do we believe that big tech versus government should be investing more into this technology transfer? This is a devil's advocate question again, gentlemen. If I may put it that way.
Versus. I don't think it's a zero-sum game, and I think
it's not a zero-sum game, right?
I think that has been the genesis of a number of the issues, right? Because it starts with a versus or a zero-sum, right? Everyone can win, and I think that there is a role to be played by both government and one of the most obvious example of technology transfer coming out of the government and then making its way into what is now life as we all know it is what we call the internet, which wasn't called the internet when it was in research labs, right? You all know this. So that's a classic example of government's work started for the military. In fact, a ton of things started there. A lot of the research we do when we send guys to the moon and to the space station is going to make its way back into the commercial world that we live in, right? So I believe that for this bullet, there's absolutely 100% a role for the government to play here. Like Trevor said, I believe they have a role as they're supposed to, which is to create that environment, that rich environment that cultivates these things, which requires investment. And then there's also a role for the private sector, right? Now I'm not sure what big tech is in Jamaica, but certainly our version of big tech or big private sector, because we don't have any big tech in Jamaica, right? But we have big private sector. I believe there's a role for them as well. And so I think this is a joint effort, not a one versus the other.
Excellent point. Devil's advocate question, but I love that response, and I move it around the room. Thank you very much on that one, Art. Raj, you want to weigh in, followed by Glenn.
Was that Glenn who just spoke? Because I'm trying to put a voice to a name.
That was Art who was just speaking. That was Art who just spoke.
Okay, so that's what I thought. It sounded like Arthur, and then you said Glenn. Okay, yeah, thank you. Just two quick thoughts here, right? Closing thoughts. One is, yes, we're talking about patents and copyrights, as it relates to published work and IP, what have you. But at the same time, realize that a majority of the businesses in the world, both small and big, don't have any patents, and they're successful. So what I'm trying to say is that patent alone is not a substitute for taking a good idea to market, right? And obviously backing it up with good ethics, responsiveness, quality, offerings. So even the company that I work for, we currently don't have any patents, but we're quite successful in the orbit that we're in. So just want to kind of put it there for the record. The question of government's role, where I come from, I don't like a government's hand in anything where it should not be or can be avoided. Especially in the times that we're living now, we're seeing with big tech, become a techno-fascist world now, with everything that they're doing, buying or burying their competition, destroying small businesses. So, for me, as one of the panel members, I think, alluded to, yes, there's a role for government to play, but again, it's just to create an environment, not really to get their hands in with the private sector, collude with the private sector, let private sector have a free hand, let innovation emerge. And the third point I'd like to make is, for Jamaica, right, or any other Caribbean nation, since we're talking about the Caribbean region, we share common shared values, right? Again, anything you develop, Sean, you got to develop for a market outside of the Caribbean, because again, it's a fact, right? The geographical constraints, limitations. I mean, there just isn't enough of a market size, to be viable, in the Caribbean region. So you have to develop for a bigger market, be EU, US, Asia, what have you. So just want to, make sure that we all kind of, pass that on. And I'm hoping that, the research project we started, between Novatics and UTech, that'll lead to, some innovative solutions, that we can commercialize and monetize down the road, and like the example I shared in the chat panel there about a partner that I've been working with for the last 20 years. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Excellent point, Raj. Excellent. So success alone is not driven by the actors of government or the big tech. Certainly they will have a role to play, but they are not exclusively the only sufficient and necessary condition in which to thrive as a university and to help students and to help faculty and just to help the Jamaican people as a whole. So it seems like a clear, and these are from very bright people on this call, some very useful points that you're making. I'm going to move around the room and I'm going to defer to Glenn to argue, probably from the US standpoint, where there is big tech versus government. How is this technology transfer investing perceived? I figure private sector investment in the university versus government investment through NSF dollars, etc. But is there a path to wealth creation for the ecosystem that is around? And I say this to say, before Glenn jumps in, at University of Waterloo in Canada, all right, I recognize that they have at that university, JCS actually did a site visit there in 2018 and 2019, where we were looking at new business models for Jamaican companies. And the universities had freedom of speech to allow students and staff to build out patents, to build out IP. There was no charge to them to do any of that. There's no government drawdown in terms of wanting this. Neither is the university asking anybody for anything. And that built an ecosystem at Waterloo that those grads were the grads who are driving the sector in Canada. Some have left and gone to the Silicon Valley and built out ecosystems in Silicon Valley. Can Jamaica get to that point? I mean, it allowed students in droves to come to that university from around the world because there was a freedom for their IP to be recognized by the local government in Canada and by the big tech organizations. So I just bring in that reference of a use case based on this point. But Glenn, share your view as another university professor in the US system as to where you see this particular conversation.
Well, I agree with what's been said so far in terms of it's not an either or. I think, government should be investing, whether it's through leadership or grants and that sort of thing. Big tech also, in the US especially, they participate with universities, whether it's research or whether it's donations in terms of funding laboratories. What was interesting is that I was thinking about big tech investing, and when you mentioned Waterloo, I go back to 1970s when I was at IBM. Waterloo was a big partner with IBM and was developing a lot of things that IBM was working on as well. They were pretty prolific at Waterloo. So, I know down the road here at another university, I know HP, Hewlett Packard is investing heavily, and that's throughout the US. If they perceive that, one, there are students that will benefit from such an investment, whether it's laboratory software, whatever. But also, the big tech can also serve as a destination point for internships and co-op opportunities as well. It's not directly related to the technology transfer, but it's a way to build partnerships. So I believe that if the university is, and I assume they are, trying to build those relationships with whether they're Jamaican companies or U.S. companies, it's mutually beneficial to both. It gives big tech an opportunity to pull from a pool of students to serve in internships and so forth, as well as to help benefit community service, if you would, to universities.
And in that context, Glenn, is there a technology transfer office at Emory?
Yeah, I believe there is. Whether it's a separate office, there's a research office. There's of course the legal team, and they work with technology transfer. And in fact, Embry-Riddle has an incubator, if you would, or a center, a separate building actually, that is geared for companies to move into to work with as well. So, but again, they're very focused on aeronautics.
Sure, as their business model. All right, so in other words, there's enough examples of elucidating use cases that can establish a transfer office. And by the way, we at UTech have an Office of Technology Application Development, which Dr. Campbell here started. I think it represents a terms of reference for what a technology transfer office could be, just that we have really matured it to that point. And it's something that I'm now looking to see where the possibilities of this lie. So the room wasn't built in a day, but you have to start somewhere. So this is a very good set of answers here. Thanks very much for that, Glenn. Leighton, you want to weigh in at this point on this piece?
I think enough has been said. I mean,
Okay.
I do take the point. I agree with the points made. There's a role for government, and certainly in the Caribbean, I don't know of us having big tech, but we do have sufficient large companies that can partner. I really do agree with collectively all the points that have been made so far in this point.
Okay, excellent. Seeing that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we could argue that the technology professional and the skills required for that individual leaving school, not only just the university, but any form of training, doesn't guarantee them a job off the bat. Nothing replaces experience. But you know, if there are young, bright people coming out with ideas and they want to start up their own companies as a part of building out, building out that ecosystem, and possibly taking on other young entrepreneurs like themselves to build that experience and come to a Glenn or to myself or Arthur, to anybody here to support their products and their services. What recommendations at this point would you make, right, to monetize on any IP? I mean, is there a recommendation at all you'd make on how you think, you know, the whole business of IP should be monetized, if at all? You can start anywhere.
Sean, I, I just wanted to speak to this last question and the one before.
Oh, okay.
Relates
Sorry about that. Yes. Go ahead.
to
So
big tech and government.
do both. Do both. Yes. Yes.
But I think it's something that we really, you know, when we talk about government creating an environment, something that we need to consider, and we tried to start this back in 2016. There's this thing called national problems, right? And Jamaica, much like any other country in the region or globally, has no shortage of national problems that technology can you know, be developed to solve. Now, here's what happened. I'm going to be a little controversial here, so I hope some people don't listen to this, and some do. The government gets a whole lot of funding from multilaterals in aid of projects to solve national problems. But you know what happens? That money doesn't go all the time to companies or entities locally. It comes in externally and it goes right back out. Now, one of the things that, you know, when you talk about creating an environment, government needs to have a national imperative that says, hey, we have all of these national problems. And when we're negotiating for loan or grant money, one of the conditions that we would want to have is that money must be for growth and capacity building of our local sector. So now what you want is you want to have companies either who exist locally or form companies locally to solve these national problems. Now, how can they do that? They go to university and say, listen, we need an enterprise platform for HR management, and we have X amount of funds for it. We want a local entity to build it. Not that we don't have the talent, but we don't have the experience. Now, what we want there is partnership between a local company who is tasked to build it with perhaps an international entity that has the ability and the knowledge to do enterprise stuff. Now, that's how you transfer knowledge and technology, right? Because what tends to happen is when the multilateral money comes, the project gets done, no knowledge is left here except for how to use this thing, but we never taught anybody how to build it, right? So government needs to say, look, we want to spend the money for these big projects with local companies, whether they exist or not. If you need to farm it, go farm it, right? If private sector sees the opportunity to invest in a startup that is going to now build a solution for a national problem, then that entire process must force the startup to have a business plan, so on and so forth, because all of that is part of getting that job. And you must force that to happen. And that is what government's role could be, right? Because that is how you grow capacity and build the experience. Because now what happens is when you're done building that product for the government of Jamaica, look at the testimonial that you will have, look at the experience that you've garnered, and look at the global marketplace for that product that solves a problem in some other country that has it, right? So we need to start looking at things that way. So look at national problems, because we have a lot of them. Look at how we can create companies and products and technologies to solve these problems, because chances are, even though you're solving those problems in Jamaica, they exist regionally, and a market would exist for the product that you've created, and they exist globally, right? And in doing so, what the government needs to do is to create the cycle that says the money that we get, because they have the money, right, from multilaterals, we're going to channel it to these businesses, because we want local companies to build the solutions that we need for our national problems, and then take those products and solutions and market them globally, right? So if we look at some recommendations, I would love to see, you know, the universities make the case that, listen, whenever you put out an RFP for you know, an HR system or a you know, enterprise document management or financial system, or we want to be the ones who build that. And whether we partner with someone overseas with requisite knowledge and transfer that knowledge to our people here and build that capacity here, that's what we want to see and do. And that is how we start to grow that ecosystem, by saying, look, all of these major things must be built here. Canada does stuff like that, and they facilitate that kind of ecosystem building. We need to start doing that here, because it makes no sense for us to be constantly going. In 2015, I got a report that highlighted how much, and this blew my mind, how much the import-export deficit for ICT products and services was for Jamaica. You know what that number was? We import 65 times more IT products and services than we export. And there's an actual number that's attached to that, right? We need to start cutting into that, right? And the only way to do it is if we start building things here. And you know what starts to happen after that? When we start to produce technology, when we start to produce things, the exchange rate starts to do interesting things, right? And what happens is that elephant in the room that nobody talks about, which is the value of the dollar, starts to change, because now we're producing stuff and exporting that globally, right? So we need to start looking at things that way, because we have no ends of problems that can be solved with the innovative minds that we have here, but we're just not tapping into it in that way. Take the money that we get from multilaterals to build our capacity and export products after that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Excellent. So Trevor,
Are you guys still there?
Yeah, I think
we're still
What
here.
is Sean?
There's a Jerry George trying to speak. I'm just acknowledging from Digisub. I think he's a part of the Caribbean group who are here. But the floor is yours, Jerry. You seem like you wanted to weigh in on something quickly.
Yes, good evening. Actually, there was a dropout for a bit, so I wasn't sure if I was being called on. I love the point that Trevor just made in terms of the um, embracing embracing the production from the local perspective. One of the questions I have is, how do we address the issue of collaboration? We tend not to be very open to that in the region. Um, and so how do we approach that? And secondly, how do we build a trust factor so that particularly when larger companies and multinationals are putting their money to to have the reassurance that we won't get that the person who's throwing in their idea into the pot won't get pushed out and left out of the whole development system.
So Jerry, tell me where you're calling from again, and just your full name and which organization.
Oh, sorry. Jerry George. I'm from St. Lucia, and I'm the president of the St. Lucia ICT Association.
Welcome, Jerry. This is a truly Caribbean audience this evening. So you're a part of the Caribbean Engineering Group, so I sent this invitation out to them. So thank you very much for the question. I think the question that Jerry is asking, we dovetailed into that issue of culture and trust before. It's not a very simple answer to that question at all. But anybody else can weigh in, given Trevor just had the floor, and probably can answer Jerry while you're at it.
Hey, let me just say something really quick. Jerry, here's the thing. We need as regional people to stop fighting for foreign man money, right? Because it is a cultural thing that once they're coming to us with money, we can't make demands, and we must make the demands that are in keeping with what our priorities and imperatives are. And we must not be afraid to do that. What's the worst that can happen? And don't get the money? Well, what's worse, not having the money or not growing? So we kind of have to overcome that really quickly to understand that, look, when the money is coming, it needs to serve our priorities as well, right? Because if you don't understand that they really need to spend that money because it is a loan, well, let's get as much value out of it as possible. So don't be frightful that a man coming to you with $100 million US that you can't make demands. You can. And that is the challenge that we have. We afraid to make demands in our own best interest. They're giving us the money in their best interest. It's called the interest rate, right? So let's get the best out of it and understand that part of it so that when we make our demands, when we write the contracts and sign them, when we say, look, we want this to be between Jamaica, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Trinidad, that is how it works. It is up to us to make those demands. Multilateral is not going to do that for you. So that's kind of what we need to start to look at.
Excellent point, Trevor. Excellent point. And you see, on the heels of that, just to let you know, Arthur Fit had to drop off the session early based on another engagement he had. But it was great catching up with Art and him sharing his views in today's podcast. We really welcome that. But Trevor, while you're on the floor, seeing that Art is gone, you said you have to take the two questions, the one relating to government, which you did quite well. The next one about recommendations to monetize on the IP. What was your suggestion on that latter one?
So the monetization aspect was really to have, government solicit products that solve national problems. And then when they build that product through partnership with overseas and so on, but it must be built by a local entity, then you take that product that you made for the government of Jamaica and then sell that internationally. You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. But you see, you're making the point earlier, which is a very valid. Problems identification set up a problems identification database, for want of a better term. We have enough problems, as you say, in Jamaica that needs to be solved, but I don't think we have a database that classifies or clearly documents that. It therefore means that the intended companies, startup or otherwise, need to see the problems themselves.
They see it every day.
Yes.
They see them every day. If you go to company's office and try start a business, you see the problems. If you go to tax office to pay your taxes, you see the problems. If you go to the transport authority to pass your car, you see the problems. If you go to the land agency to register and get title for your house or your land, you see the problems. They're all over the place, right? No, you're right. There needs to be a central repository for that. Now, that is the kind of stuff that a university can do, right? Because you have students that can go around as a project and find.
Trevor, you still there? I think we lose it for half a second. Went back into mute. You're back on mute, Trevor.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I say you don't need government to tell you the problems. We see them, we experience them, we complain about them every single day.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. All right. Excellent point. Where am I on the floor now? I was going to detour to Glenn and then Arnett, Dr. Campbell, to weigh in on that question of monetization. If you thought you need to weigh in on it, issue. How is it in the US situation? Is it the NSF, Glenn, that comes and say, here's a problem or a call?
NSF, it's interesting. If the government gives you money to develop something, then basically you have to provide what you develop for free to the government. So you're monetizing it at the front end, but you don't have a long-term profit stream. If you develop a product through other than, well, in the US, other than grants, or just through PhD students, incubator, whatever, I would recommend that you basically look at two ways. If you notice the trend in software, for instance, is not to sell you a license that you get to use the product forever and it's yours. It's gone the way of subscriptions, meaning it's a stream of income. So when you talk about monetizing technology transfer, there are ways to license the product as opposed to sell the product.
Right.
So if you develop something, whoever the office is that works on technology transfer, the only recommendation I would have is definitely think about the long term and not just a short term, quick intake of money. Look at private placement, labeling of product, that sort of thing.
So licensing, okay, so licensing the product. So you're in trouble of the same argument then, really. So you can license your product and then you can seek to offer whatever the companies you have started as a service.
You basically, if you're going to share technology, like if you're developing a solution as opposed to an invention, right? So a solution for a software application, it's the type of thing that to monetize it, you look at, licensing it on an annual basis, for instance. And with that annual income, comes support and upgrades and that sort of thing. So, and you may not want to do that through the university per se long term, but that's why you use an incubator.
Excellent point. Excellent points. This has been a very riveting podcast session this afternoon, and it's about wrapping up shortly. But Dr. Campbell, anything on the monetization, and then we're gonna ask for to take on, what they think are some of the next steps. Anything on the monetization?
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Yes, sir.
Well, monetization. I go back to what we can do at the level of the university. Definitely, there is model for monetizing what we are doing. I think it rests in some of the ideas that we have started to explore regarding an expanded SAPNA.
Yes.
I think it's worthwhile to think carefully how we will move in that direction.
Yes.
So we start with some of the local problems that we see that are low-hanging fruits that we can build a basic revenue stream out of,
Yes.
one that we can give students, so we can build some solutions for small businesses. We can partner with them. We can also work with some of the local businesses, especially those that are knocking on our doors right now for talents, where we can negotiate with them to get some funding that can give scholarships to these youngsters to help to develop these solutions as well.
Excellent point.
Right. So that's one way that we could start. But the bigger problem for me is that we are an island nation, and we can either think like Singapore has done in terms of, we all know that, Lee Kim Won, I think that's his name. I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly, but he came to Jamaica to study what we were doing in Jamaica, and then lessons learned from that went back to Singapore, implemented it, and today, Singapore is a star. And I'm saying that we can look at what is the market saying to us. The market is saying to us that we can produce talents for our ready market. Our market is North America primarily, and so we can look at our secondary, all our education system up to our secondary, and make that the best so that we can come up with a master plan, put the best teachers in it, put the best facilities in there, get the funding that we need to produce as much as we can in terms of the quality of students coming out of our high schools.
Okay.
And if we do that, and we have a UTech, a UII, NCU, etc., along with some of the top universities with our neighbors, and we are collaborating, and then we put these students into the kind of high demand fields, then that could be a major solution for our country, for the region itself, and the excess will always be employed. Who want to live and work continuously in Jamaica can do that, but it can become a sustainable model. It can become a sustainable model, and we get the best of both worlds. So we are training, and we are building, we are creating products, we are creating services, we are becoming technology leaders, we are registering IPs out of our academic institutions, and we are getting the best of both worlds. But it takes big vision and sustainable implementation of it. And as I say, it goes back to the culture. And, we need some social anthropologists to work with us to best understand what is it among us why we are seen as a country of samples, where we do good samples and the buyer come and say, well, good sample, and say, okay, can I have 100,000 of this? And we fail, can't make them consistently. We need to learn to make 100,000, 100 million the same way.
This has been a riveting conversation on Caribbean Thought Leadership, Sunday afternoon, 4:30 p.m. every Sunday local time here in Kingston. Today's topic has been intellectual property, copyright, patent, non-disclosure, and we have had an eloquent panel of industry and academicians, both local and in the diaspora, engaging on a very involved topic. As you can see from my screen, these are the questions that we've been asking and answering. And as you're realizing, there's no silver bullet response to any one of them. They are thought-provoking, and they require application and action. So in a moment, I'm going to give everybody a chance to wrap up with what they think should be next. But did I miss anyone in the comments on the monetization piece? I don't know if Raj had a view, or even Jerry, you had a view. I don't know, Jerry, you had a view on that question. Give me a sense of how this is in St. Lucia. Love to hear what's going on there as another part of our Caribbean neighbors. Are you monetizing from anything, the IP? Yes.
Not really. It is basically a everyone is left on their own, do your own thing, because we don't have some sort of concerted effort by the authorities to drive that sort of system. And sometimes we even find ourselves at odds with those very authorities, where they seem to operate counter to local development of IP products, software designs, and so on. So it's very enlightening, some of the suggestions in terms of having governments organize and having the ability to provide the enabling environment and let the market kind of organically develop, but by promoting local involvement, by directing the funds in the way it will most benefit us. I really love to hear that part of it. So I'm hoping that as we go along, we can.
Yeah, we're gonna have a follow-up outside of this. We'll be having a technology transfer workshop. I'm gonna invite you as the head of the St. Lucia's Tech Association, because on this call, I'm the immediate past president of the Jamaica Computer Society, and we have the president of the JCS Silicon Valley and the JCS New York chapter who has been here. So it's the right people and company you're talking with. And it's the first time actually meeting you, Jerry. So this is what the pandemic has done to us. It has introduced us in another way. But I'm going to, so I put my email in the chat, and probably you could put yours. Let me talk to you offline, and probably a WhatsApp number. We could catch up on some things that we could do with St. Lucia and yourself, right? Very nice island indeed. I love it down there. Leighton, the floor is yours.
Yes. So I listened the panelist answer to the whole issue of how we monetize it, and you and I have had that conversation in the past about the Canada government partnership with private organization, right? And if you recall, some years ago, I would say more than a decade ago, Canada was importing a lot of IT skills.
Yes.
Fast forward to 2021, they are not so much importing IT skills. In fact, it's one of those skills where you're less likely to be issued a PR because they have an influx here, locally bred, locally produced. Because they have seek to partner with private sector as a part of the first degree, your undergrad degree. You must do at least 4 or 5 term with a private company, getting that part of experience before you graduate and go into the real work world. So as persons graduate, they're graduating with not just a degree, but they would have at least more than 12 months worth of experience under their belt. But the question that is in my mind, because I've, been a part of the graduate program, I've seen students with some very interesting research. And my experience with students is that, for one, they just want to graduate. Their goal, their entire mission is to graduate. It's not about how do I start up a company. It's not part of our culture. And so my question is there an opportunity for us that is on this call, right? That is involved in academia, one way or the other, having identified real talent, real work, to engage those students, to establish that um, relationship, to move them, recommend or bring them into an incubator where they are developing that idea as opposed to going out seeking work in their work world. Is there an opportunity there?
Yes, there's definitely an opportunity there, which is one of the motivations in even keeping this forum, to do some scanning of what the environment is saying. Particularly now in the pandemic, it has to be that we explore that, because just as how you're saying in Canada, they are looking at managing and improving local talent. We have to now look at improving local talent to live locally and work globally if we can in this pandemic, and it's really digging our heels in to do so. It is clear to me that that is an opportunity as a university. As a matter of fact, that is what I'm preaching to students in the graduate as well as the undergraduate programs, that they need to build their own self-confidence in writing good software, building out good projects. I actually deliver some classes this summer as well, and it's really taking on very interesting and challenging projects, and then to move them to industry and to actually take some of them as use cases and present them for companies. So there is an opportunity, and Leighton, I would like us to, even after this call, have a sit down to explore this. I'm actually going to keep a technology transfer workshop internally come early June, that sort of do a deep dive into this as a one day, 2-day event. We can actually seek to get some proof of concepts with students going. So it is a can do. It is a can do.
I want to share an experience, Prof. Some years ago, many years ago, we met a young graduate from the University of the West Indies. He wrote a software. He graduated as an actuarial scientist with a minor in programming, right? But his idea was brilliant, and he came to our company, and we helped that person, right, improve on the idea. And today, many years, I'm not sure where he's at. The last time I heard is was somewhere in some foreign country. But that product that he built in Jamaica is global, right?
Yeah.
So I think in terms of the partnership, not in academia, but even a private sector can help to, as a part of this incubator, to where we can see real value coming out of as we build capacity. Because if we're just building capacity to some of the points that were previously raised, but we're not able to realize that true value, then persons are going to continually seek
leave the country, yes,
to greener pasture, because Jamaica and the Caribbean is a beautiful place to live. But then if we're not able to monetize this thing, then persons may want to go elsewhere, right? So I think there's really an opportunity for us to move this forward.
Excellent. Well, I know that Trevor had to leave earlier. I want to thank him for coming. I just recognize that. And I know that Dr. Dardick also has to leave. So I'd like to also thank him for coming. And really, as we sort of elucidate on all these points, this has been a very good session. A very, very good session. So any last words? What's next? Let me just put up at the deck. What's next from where you sit as it relates to this conversation? I think I would like to go first quickly to say what's next is that we are going to have a technology transfer workshop that looks on how we can build out that unit now. I actually have taken on the responsibility to build out an R&D planning unit that scouts for MOUs and so on, and MOAs for projects for the staff and the programs at large, but a full technology transfer unit and how it should work and to mobilize it with staff from here as well as in the diaspora. So I know I'll be reaching out. I meet with Arthur Fit tomorrow evening. I take some very wise advice from persons like Raj, who has a lot of experience in this space as well, and an ecosystem of people who could work with us to mobilize that technology transfer office, and then to get staff and students getting their projects in, and we find space for where those projects can move to startups and so on. Sometimes to wait on somebody to do the thing and you yourself seeing the need and not doing the thing is just as being guilty of the thing not being done. So I'm not going to wait on government. I took Trevor's point about government and government policy, but sometimes to drive government policy, you have to start with the action first and let government see what you're doing and people fall in line. That's how the athletes who have done great in the country have done it. But that's my next step, major next step from this particular thought leadership forum this evening. But a few of us left on the call, so I'll take the words around the table. Dr. Campbell and Jerry, any last words on this very riveting conversation this weekend? Very much look forward to its podcast posting and sharing with the public. Doc, you're still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Last words.
Yes.
Definitely, we have this afternoon looked at the various mechanisms of IPs, how to register them, patents, etc., for ownership of one's work. We know that there are many roadblocks to get in there, but I think that a start is worth the effort, and we need to get going on what we have to do. Nothing beat nothing beat a trial but a failure, right? If that's the right way to be said.
Indeed.
So we have to move with haste to implement what we have to implement, because we have many ideas that have originated not only among us but among our students,
Sure.
And we need to guide the way, to lead them, so that the next generation of professionals, researchers, inventors will be better placed than we are today. So we need to move with some haste and purpose.
Yes.
To ensure that that this is happening.
All right,
And,
good one.
I think we are committed to doing just that as we
Definitely.
move towards, certainly within the School of Computing and IT, to move from just research for the sake of research to purposeful research.
That's correct. That's correct. Excellent. Excellent point.
I could not have said it better, Dr. Campbell. And good to hear your voice again, Dr. Campbell. It's been a while.
So I was wondering if you remember me.
Of course, Doctor. How can I? I mean,
as the man who share a birthday with my second son.
Okay, good stuff.
Yes. But I mean, very interesting topic, and I think Dr. Campbell said it well. You know, there are enough opportunity for us to just get started. You know,
right away.
There will be challenges, but guess what? As we come up against those challenges, right?
You have to push ahead.
We can solution around that particular challenge as soon as they arise. But for now, we have a clear vision, and I think the opportunity is now, and we don't want to be having this same conversation 15 years from now, man, we're looking back and said, well, you know,
Oh, no.
university so and so, our country so and so, right?
No.
So I would say that the
It is.
opportune time to start is
It's
now.
now. It's now. Yes, man. Definitely. And I
Can
think
do.
that's a nice way
Mm.
to close out. And you see, Jerry is over in St. Lucia. I don't know if you know my very good friend, Professor Fabian Monrose, who lives in that neck of the woods. The Monrose are quite a popular name down there. But I think there's an opportunity for us to look at some partnerships. So I'll be reaching out to you, Jerry, to see what potentials are for you and the ecosystem there as a partnership with us here in Jamaica. Really glad that you're able to join the call as well with us.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and I definitely will be looking forward to keeping abreast with the next steps and seeing what we can do both on the ground here and also in terms of collaborating with with our partners around the region.
Definitely, man. And thank you for having us. And invite the others next time to come, because as you can see, Caribbean Thought Leadership, we mean business here. We have some very insightful conversations. So thank you again for coming.
Okay, then.
Gentlemen, I have to run within a minute. I actually will want to catch up with both yourself, Dr. Campbell and Mr. Michel, but I probably have to do it on the public holiday tomorrow or another day in the week. But it was good catching up with everyone today. Great conversation. Have a pleasant. Today is my Earth Strong evening, just remember, so I have a little party to go to shortly, so I can't afford to miss it. All right?
Yes, and happy birthday,
blessings,
sir.
man. Blessings,
Yes. Give thanks and enjoy, man. You know,
Yes,
we live once on this earth, you know. So
telling you,
enjoy,
bro.
and as you're doing it, we just continue to impact the next generation to come, and that's why we're having these conversations.
Telling you, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Give thanks,
All right. So
gentlemen.
look forward for that invite for discussion
in
between
short
you and
order, in short
Dr.
order.
Campbell. Okay. And Jerry, nice meeting you, sir.
Jerry,
You
you already reached out to him with contact details, so thank you.